Welcome to True Seekers North East. Tonight we've got Mark Devlin and he's going to be talking about the dark heart of the BBC. So if you turn your phones off on silent, we'll have a good night. We might do a bit of a live stream for the poor souls that couldn't get a ticket.
Oh well,
yeah.
They could always come down the community centre tomorrow.
They could come down the community centre tomorrow and see Musical Truth 3.
Sound bites.
Sound bites, yeah.
That's right.
Okie doke, I'll leave it with you, Mark.
Alright.
Bye for now.
Thanks. Well, hello folks, full house, looking good. So this material is kind of outside of what I normally speak about, but there is some overlap with the corporate music industry, which is my specialist subject, as we'll see. I'll be talking some more about that at the community centre tomorrow. Before I start, I've got a book plug, and it's not one on my own. I've been asked by Dawn to mention this new book. Where is she? There she is. Her new book, An eBay Life for Me, Tips and Advice on How to Sell, with a cover note from John Hamer, no less, who I hear is a bit of a lodger around these parts these days.
It's the guest bedroom's now called the John Hamer room.
John Hamer Street, with portraits of him.
Yeah, that bloody often.
So this is the proof copy. The book is yet to arrive in mass quantity, but I tell you, as an author myself, there is nothing more exciting than getting the first copy of a new book and holding it in your hands. I'm going to get that with Musical Truth 3 in about 2 weeks. But in the meantime, Dawn's book, what's it priced at?
£10.
£10, yeah? Right, okay.
Can you get it on eBay though? Can you get it on eBay?
No, this is the only copy in the world so far. So that's the plug out of the way. I'll plug my own books at the end. So, The Dark Heart of the BBC. This is a presentation that I first delivered at the Questioning History Conference in summer 2019. And I decided I would resurrect it for this presentation because I wanted to find a subject that I'd not talked about at Truth Seekers North East before, and this is about the only one that was left. And I thought, well, I'll just dig out the presentation from 2019 and tweak it a bit and use that. And I hunted high and I hunted low and I looked on every USB stick I had in the house and I could not find the presentation anywhere. I did find a very rough YouTube version of it from somebody that had filmed it in the crowd. The audio was terrible, but I used that to piece together and recreate the presentation. So I had to download all the pictures and all the videos again and piece it all together bit by bit. So this is a fairly faithful recreation of the original talk with a few tweaked and up-to-date bits. So let's get into it. The dark heart of the BBC, the sordid side of that disgusting organisation. Where do we start? Well, we could always start at Broadcasting House. So the BBC began pretty much about 100 years ago, 1920s. Started off broadcasting radio, then in the 1930s they got into television broadcasting. So they're pretty much on their 100th anniversary now. And for many decades, their radio programmes came out of this iconic broadcasting house in central London. This building is notorious for the statue which adorns the outside of it, just above the main entrance. And it's based apparently upon a Shakespeare play, so I'm told. The statue is titled Ariel and Prospero. And what you have is a naked child writhing against the crotch of an adult male who appears to be enjoying the experience. So it's blatant pedophilia, and it seems symbolic of the true nature of this corporation when we get into what it stood for through the years, as we'll get into. During many of the recent protest marches in London, crowds have gathered outside the BBC and they've chanted, taunts like pedos and all this, and they've tried to deface the statue. And the BBC has been under huge pressure to get this statue removed. But despite all of that, it still remains in place. They don't seem to want to take it down.
And it's the sculptor's child as well, that's what makes it even worse.
Yeah. And the sculptor himself, Eric Gill, was a known paedophile who abused his own children. And he was jailed on child molestation charges.
On the dog.
You what?
On the dog.
Oh.
Yeah? Wow. So, when we're talking about The BBC and its connections to paedophilia, of course, the obvious name that people think of is Jimmy Savile, and we have plenty on Savile. Isn't it incredible? It's now 10 years since Savile died. That was October 2011. We just passed the 10th anniversary of that. He was born on Halloween, which seems quite appropriate. And the news of his true nature broke a year later, October 2012. There was a documentary done for the ITV, and they came out and revealed what Savile had been up to all these years. Much of it on BBC premises, paid for by licence payers, taxpayers. Many of his offences took place seemingly in BBC dressing rooms, particularly those for Top of the Pops. So we've known about him for 10 years, but in the public's consciousness, it all seems to have just fizzled out and gone away. And although the likes of us might still call out the BBC for what they've stood for and the various child molesters they've sheltered over the years, as far as the general public is concerned, there's no such outrage. And most people seem content to have chalked Jimmy Savile up as just one bad apple that slipped through the net for 50 years. Nobody knew what he was up to. Director General after Director General had no clue what he was doing. But he was far from the only paedophile employed by the BBC. Here he is with Jonathan King. So let's get into him for a minute. Jonathan King came out of Charterhouse Public School in Godalming, Surrey. That's where he graduated. And the notable thing about this school is that it spawned a young Genesis, the rock group. So they were all students at Charterhouse. Jonathan King is said to have discovered them and put them on the map. And he cropped up in Operation Arundel, which was one of these investigations launched in the wake of the Savile scandal, alongside Operation U-Tree, which was the best known one. This is an excerpt from Musical Truth 1, where I did go into some of this in terms of its connections into the music industry. Documents presented in Operation Arundel's court case against DJ Jonathan King were that he invited back boys from the Walton Hop Club and would also drive around in his Rolls Royce outside schools, enticing boys into the car to help him with a pop quiz. Makes a change from would you like to come and see some puppies, I suppose. He had a secret fantasy room, a large rectangular suite in his Bayswater mansion, bedecked in lush black leather sofas, large swastika flags hung ceremoniously from ceiling to floor, which is a very bizarre thing considering he's Jewish. But anyway, another BBC paedophile that came out of radio was Chris Denning, who was a one-time presenter on BBC Radio 1. And he was implicated in the Walton Hop, which was this disco for young boys that was run by Jonathan King. Another name that crops up in that regard is Tam Patton, who was the manager of the Bay City Rollers. And one of the young boys that attended the Walton Hop was Jimmy Percy of the new wave group Sham 69. So they were all involved in the Walton Hop in the late 1970s. Denning ran that disco alongside his mate Jonathan King. When Jonathan King was arrested on historic paedophilia charges, his bail money was put up by Simon Cowell. Why would Simon Cowell want to do that, I wonder? At the time, Simon Cowell's PR publicist was Max Clifford, and he's said to have had a private word with Simon Cowell about the kind of man that Jonathan King was, and to advise him against stumping up the bail money. This was before Max Clifford himself was arrested also on sexual abuse charges, alongside so many others. In the wake of the Jimmy Savile investigation, Operation U-Tree, you might recall a whole bunch of Z-list celebrities were hung out to dry. Stuart Hall of It's a Knockout, and Dave Lee Travis got thrown into that mix as well. But his crime seemed to consist of groping women's breasts, grown adult women. Although that's wrong, it's not in the same league as abusing children. But Travis was kind of thrown under the bus to create the impression to the general public that something is being done, we're addressing this problem. But all roads lead back to the BBC, ultimately. So here we have a long-time BBC radio presenter, originally out of Australia, known as Alan Fluff Freeman. I wonder how he earned his nickname. I'll leave everyone to look up what fluffing is after the presentation. But I think there's a clue in the name there. So Alan Freeman seemed to get away with it all these years, as so many of them did. I don't know if you've noticed, but there are no living paedophiles. The only paedophiles we get to learn about are dead. It's funny that. Quite often there's sirs as well, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence and nothing to worry about. So Alan Freeman was seemingly a close personal associate of Jimmy Savile in all kinds of ways. So in the wake of Savile's true nature being exposed, a man came forward to report how when he was a minor, he'd been raped at a party by Jimmy Savile and Alan Freeman. This was an article in the Daily Mirror from a few years ago. Man tells of agony at the hands of BBC pedo ring involving DJ Alan Freeman and evil pal Jimmy Savile. And this ties into a story which I carried in Musical Truth 1. In 2012, the Daily Mail carried the story of a 15-year-old schoolgirl, Claire McAlpine, who'd been a dancer on Top of the Pops. She'd been discovered dead by her mother in 1971, apparently the result of a suicidal overdose. Claire had left behind a diary in which she had written accounts of how she'd been sexually abused by a string of BBC presenters and celebrities. The celebrities in question were never publicly identified, although it has emerged that Jimmy Savile, surprise, surprise, was quizzed by detectives over whether he knew her, which, naturally, he denied. One of Claire's friends, Jenny Bale, later stated that Savile was one of the DJs that had abused Claire, but that he had bluffed his way out of it. Claire was written off as a troubled fantasist, with the coroner ruling that she'd taken her own life in anticipation of not being able to fulfill her dreams to become a pop star. Justice being done as ever. As the Mail reported in a 2012 article, the allegations made and casually dismissed both within and outside the BBC by Claire McAlpine all those years ago can point to only one dreadful conclusion, that far from being alone, the predatory behaviour displayed by Jimmy Savile, national icon and charity fundraiser, was common among many big show business names of the time, as we can now know. So it was Sir Jimmy Savile, and he was described as a national treasure. And I just wonder who gets to decide these things? Who gets to decide who is a national treasure? Because we don't get polled on this, as far as I can make out. Amongst the glut of celebs who were hung out to dry by Operation Yewtree amidst accusations of sexual impropriety were, as I just mentioned, the It's a Knockout presenter Stuart Hall, comedians Freddie Starr and Jim Davidson, former BBC producer Wilfred Dayath, great name, publicist Max Clifford, there he is, Ted Beston, known in BBC circles as Uncle Ted, and a one-time radio producer for Jimmy Savile and Tony Blackburn. The uncle bit's a bit worrying, isn't it? I remember the rock opera Tommy, directed by Ken Russell, where Keith Moon played a paedophile babysitter, and his name was Uncle Early. It's always uncles. BBC DJ Paul Gambaccini, who was later vindicated, and Gambaccini has actually become very outspoken recently about the BBC and the bias and the propaganda that it displays, and he's become outspoken about all kinds of things.
Why, has he got cancer and about to die or something?
He's what?
Has he got cancer and he's about to die now?
Well, he probably will be soon after all this. Yeah.
That's wishful thinking.
And the former BBC Two announcer and Radio 1 DJ Chris Denning, as we just mentioned. Now, one presenter whose name you don't often hear spoken of in the same breath as all the others is John Peel. Real name John Ravencroft. He cultivated this image for himself as a man of the people, you know, this working class guy that was into alternative music and he just liked presenting it, and he kind of shunned the conventions of the corporation, at least in terms of his public image. He wasn't like the other DJs, he wasn't some cheesy, smashy and nicey type DJ, you know, he stood for real music and representing new bands and all of this. And he had a late night show on Radio 1 for many, many years. He was there from day one. He had a show called The Perfumed Garden in 1967 when Radio 1 first launched in the midst of the psychedelic swinging London era. So that's the public image that John Peel portrayed. It's very much at odds with his upbringing, because he actually came from a quite well-off family and he attended public school. And there are early recordings of him where he speaks with a very distinctive public school accent, a real plum in his mouth, you know. And he seemed to work very hard at crafting a working class sort of accent for himself. He's supposed to have been from the Wirral, I think, Merseyside. But his accent always sounded more Birmingham to me. It always sounded like Midlands. It's a very curious thing. Anyway, that's John Peel as most people think of him. And here's John Peel as most people don't think of him. On his Radio 1 show, there was a period where he ran a Schoolgirl of the Year competition. And to help promote it, he himself dressed up as a schoolgirl. It's lovely, it's something we all want to see, I'm sure. So more on that. Before joining the original lineup of Radio 1 and going on to enjoy a long BBC career which lasted all the way up to his death in 2004, Peel worked at a Texas radio station in the early 60s. In later interviews he recalled some of the perks of that particular period as involving many girls, some as young as 13, queuing up outside his studio to offer him sexual favours. Well, of course I didn't ask for ID, Peel has said in interview. All they wanted me to do was to abuse them sexually, which of course I was only too happy to do. It was the glamour of the job. Never happened to me as a DJ, I tell you. not till after I was married. Had some offers since then, I tell you. But never one I could actually act on. But anyway, frustratingly, Peel says, American girls of that period, as they do now actually, had this strange notion of virginity as a tangible thing which you surrendered to your husband on your wedding night. So they would do anything but shag you. They'd give you a blowjob before they'd shag you. So that's John Peel, who incidentally met his long-term wife Shirley when she was 15.
Oh, the pig.
Yeah, as he referred to her as. Another BBC DJ who was on Radio 2 for a long time, also presented Crackerjack on BBC One, was Ed Stewpot Stewart. And he beat Peel by 2 years because he met and started dating his wife when she was 13. So he was a very good fit for the BBC. Jimmy Savile getting together with Gary Glitter, you know, it all seems so obvious now with the benefit of hindsight, knowing what we do about these individuals. Jimmy Savile getting his pal Gary Glitter onto Jim Will Fix It. And I don't know if anyone's seen the This Is Your Life episode that was done on, who was it? It was somebody else's episode on This Is Your Life, but they wheeled out Gary Glitter as a guest. And somebody started talking about, somebody started relating this anecdote. And they said, oh, do you remember, Gary, we met up with these young girls, and Gary's starting to panic. He's going, shh, 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 trying to hush her up. I must try and find that clip. But that's before Gary Glitter got done. And he got done because he put his PC in for repair in a branch of PC World in Bristol. And when the technicians were going through it, they found thousands of images of children, indecent images. So that's how he fell foul of the authorities. Interestingly, a fairly similar thing happened to Pete Townsend of The Who, when many indecent images of children were found on his computer or photographs at his house. But he got away with it. And his excuse was he was researching paedophilia and he wanted to understand it more. And that was accepted by the police, and he never actually got done for that. But Gary Glitter wasn't so lucky. It seems every now and again they throw a few of them under the bus, again, just to create the impression that something is being done. Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris. Rolf Harris, another national treasure, which somebody else has decided. Cliff Richard being on the same page is pure coincidence, neither here nor there.
It's definitely a conferred nonce, but never mind.
Yeah. So at this point I want to go to a video, and unfortunately for the videos I have to come out of the presentation and go to the desktop, but it's better than not having them at all. So I just want to play a video at this point. Now this is a sketch that was done for not the 9 o'clock news in the early 80s, and it kind of speaks for itself.
Oh, wow. Good find.
So what did they know? And was that somebody's idea of a subtle little in-joke within the BBC, thinking that nobody in the general public is going to know what this refers to? And it took about 30 years for us to discover what Rolf Harris was really all about. So let's get back into the slideshow. Something I forgot to mention about Broadcasting House actually was that I've since discovered that directly opposite the Broadcasting House address is a property whose address is 2 All Souls Place, and it was once occupied by Aleister Crowley, the notorious dark occultist and witch. So Crowley lived in that place up until about 2 years before the BBC occupied Broadcasting House across the street. Quite interesting. So that's the Rolf Harris video. Now, getting on to children in need, kind of topical. When was it? Last Friday, or was it this Friday? Is it? Oh, well, it's very, very topical. I don't even know when it's on, I just know it's in November.
This will be interesting.
So, children in need, which, when it comes to the BBC, could be kind of reversed and expressed as in need of children, I guess. So this is their annual money grab, where they do an appeal to emotion and they try and blackmail and gaslight the British public into parting with their money to support kids who, you know, I don't know, have been sexually abused or, you know, that kind of thing by celebrities, you know, that sort of thing. So the icon and the motif of children in need is Pudsey Bear. There's a few things about Pudsey Bear. First off, the first syllable in his name, Pud, is street slang for the male genitalia. So, of all the names this bear could have been given, that's what they chose to incorporate in his name. Then you have the fact that,
Did you know that?
yeah, Pud is
There you go.
yes, street sex slang, basically.
Oh.
So he's got the bandage over one eye, so it's leaving one eye exposed and concealing the other. So for anyone that's ever caught any of my presentations on the music industry, you'll know that that's a common symbol to indicate that the artist concerned is owned by the control system and is a part of the machinery. So we've got that same symbolism being conveyed here. Also in satanic ritual abuse and trauma-based mind control, which I've got into in a lot of my work, it's in Musical Truth 1, there are many icons and motifs associated with that dynamic. Vigilant Citizen has got into this in many of its articles on vigilanttcitizen.com. He's detailed how teddy bears and dolls are often used to symbolise trauma-based mind control from early childhood, because what it's representing is the loss of innocence of the person concerned who's been ritually abused since early childhood. and all these things that you normally associate with a happy childhood, like bears and dolls, are satanically inverted. You often find bears with missing limbs, or dolls with arms and legs missing, you know. And here we have Pudsey with one of his eyes missing, so it's tying into that. Also, you'll note that he's got the spotted bandage, and these spots, this pattern, has been identified as a mind control trigger for those that have undergone MK Ultra style programming. So when these individuals are exposed to that pattern, it often triggers programming within them and brings forth one of these mind control alters. So this ties in again to another expression of the BBC on CBBC, the children's channel. The BBC should never be allowed to have a children's channel. You have one of the key characters, Justin Fletcher is the guy's name, and he plays a character called Mr. Tumble. And one of the main features of Mr. Tumble, my kids used to watch this, is that he's got this spotted bag. That's his famous emblem, Mr. Tumble's spotted bag. And it's the same sort of spots that you're getting on Pudsey's bandage. So again, it's conveying subtly, subliminally, ideas of satanic ritual abuse from early childhood. Charming stuff, I'm sure you'd agree. An early rendering of Pudsey Bear, before he got a makeover, looked like this. So first of all, he's sitting inside a pyramid, go figure, and he doesn't look very happy. He looks quite miserable there. You know, when he had his makeover, he's got a smile now, but he was pretty unhappy in this one, as if he'd been abused, perhaps. You know?
Stone his genitalia by the looks of it.
Well, yeah. So here's that version of Pudsey Bear inside the pyramid as a backdrop for Jimmy Savile presenting the show. Jimmy Savile presenting Children in Need and saying to the public, please give your money for all these poor kids that need your help. I mean, how sick is this? This is a disgusting organisation that needs to go. It shouldn't have survived beyond the Savile scandal. It should have gone 10 years ago. The public should have been so incensed at what this organisation stands for that they should have been pulling down that statue, you know, themselves a decade ago. It continues. Here's a Children in Need broadcast with Gary Glitter clutching a Pudsey Bear, of all the guests they could have had. Rolf Harris on stage with a giant Pudsey Bear. Do you ever get the feeling they're taking the piss? Mocking us to our faces? So when it comes to these constant allegations of the BBC being involved in paedophilia, many of these roads lead back to Jill Dando, the presenter who was shot dead outside her London home in broad daylight at point blank range in 1999. And according to her friends and according to insiders that have since come forward, she was in the process of investigating a paedophile ring that was operating from within the BBC. This was long before any of us knew about Savile or any of these other characters. So as to whether there's any connection between Jill Dando apparently investigating the BBC paedophile ring and her just happening to be shot in broad daylight on her doorstep, we must draw our own conclusions. This is an excerpt from Musical Truth 1 where I covered this. There's strong evidence to suggest that Jill Dando was in the process of investigating institutionalised paedophile rings within the British establishment when she was shot dead at point blank range in 1999. Cliff Richard, we're back to him, sorry, Sir Cliff, let's give him his proper title. Sir Cliff, who had befriended Dando a short while before her murder, was reportedly interviewed at length by the police on several occasions following her murder. Why was he such an important witness? These revelations became so widespread within the alternative media that even corporate mainstream newspapers were forced to report on the story in July 2014 to avoid being seen to be out of touch or deliberately avoiding the issue. A friend and retired co-worker of Dando's stated, "I don't recall the names of all the stars now, and I don't want to implicate anyone, but Jill said they were surprisingly big names. I think she was quite shocked when told about images of children and that information on how to join this horrible paedophile ring was freely available. And there's a mainstream news article about it there. They did have to catch up with the story in the end. There was a great blog site which ran many, many years ago. It's called Angirfan. Has anyone heard of it?
Mhm.
Yeah?
Mhm.
It was spelled Angirfan. And there was another one called the Coleman Experience. Anyone know that one? It was along similar lines. And both of these blogs, I think they've both been shut down now. Can't find them online anywhere. But they got into the question of whether it wasn't just Jill Dando that might have known about a paedophile ring within the BBC, but that there might have been other presenters that knew about it or were involved in it in some way. And a few years ago there was a spate of very unusual and unexpected deaths of various BBC presenters. So you had this guy, Christian Digby, who turned up dead at a fairly young age, and that was blamed, I think, on an overdose. It never really goes beyond that, you know, the papers just state it was an overdose and we're left to draw our own conclusions that he was some kind of drug addict or whatever. They never actually specify what caused it. There was Kevin Greening, who was a one-time breakfast show host on Radio 1. And he turned up dead in his flat, discovered by his boyfriend, and we're told that there was a cocktail of cocaine, heroin and MDMA in his system. So I guess that would do it. Then you had Mike Smith, who was also a BBC breakfast show presenter on Radio 1 in the 1980s. Took over from Mike Reed, I think. He died following surgery. He went in to have some heart surgery, and I think the story is that he died on the operating table, or if he didn't, it was a short while afterwards. So it was blamed on heart surgery gone wrong. Then these two, this is a really bizarre one. BBC children's presenters. You had Natasha Collins and Mark Spate, and they were together as a couple. So Natasha Collins turned up dead in a bathtub, which becomes very interesting when you factor in the research that I've done into the music industry in terms of the large number of music stars who have turned up dead in bathtubs. You had Jim Morrison, reportedly, in Paris in 1971, in his apartment there, was discovered dead in a bathtub. Personally, I don't accept that Jim Morrison died when we're told he did. I think that event was faked. That's just my own personal take on it. But nevertheless, the story was that he turned up dead in a bathtub. You had Dolores O'Riordan, singer with the Cranberries, who is said to have turned up dead in a bathtub in the Hilton Park Lane in London just a few years ago. You had Whitney Houston, who was discovered dead in a bathtub in the LA Beverly Hilton in the midst of a very bizarre ritual that appeared to be going on connected to the Grammys of that year. And a very short while before Whitney Houston was discovered dead in a bathtub, her daughter Bobby Christina had been found unconscious in a bathtub in the very same hotel suite that her mother turned up dead in 24 hours later. And from that point on, Bobby Christina is said to have been terrified of bathtubs for obvious reasons, and she would only ever take showers. Despite this, a few years down the line, Bobby Christina is discovered dead in a bathtub. So bathtubs do seem to figure quite prominently. There's going to be some sort of ritualistic component to what's going on here. Natasha Collins was discovered apparently by Mark Spate, and he's said to have been so distraught at her death that he went out and hung himself. And his body was discovered in a disused part of London's Paddington Station, which was sealed off from the public, and hardly anyone would have known it was there. So how he would have got there and how he would have got himself up to where he's supposed to have hung himself is anybody's guess, and we can draw our own conclusions as to what may really have happened there. So all of this was detailed in those two blogs, which are now no longer online. And then we have Rick Mayall of The Young Ones fame and various other shows. And he had a very high-profile quad biking accident a few years ago. He was messing about with his kids on some quad bikes and he fell off and got quite seriously injured, got hospitalised for a long time. But he recovered from that and got out of hospital. A few more years passed, and then he died very suddenly. I think the story was it was a heart attack or something like that. But you know, he's alive one day and dead the next, basically. And I've got a couple of very interesting videos featuring Rick Mayall from just a short while before he died to show you here. So let me just come out of this again. The first one is a warning from Rick Mayall. So have a listen to what he says here.
You don't know? No. Viewers, you don't know who the cameraman is. You don't know why you're being made to see these things. Nor do I. You're seeing me. I can't even see you. I may be dead by the time you watch this. Very possibly are. You don't know who's the man who's making the things he wants you to see. Destroy your television sets. Now. You must listen to no orders. That's all I can tell you from this point of humanity. Believe me. That's how it touches.
I didn't really understand it.
Yeah, so he's making it sound like a joke thing, but a couple of things he said there become quite chilling in the circumstances. I may be dead by the time you see this. He didn't last much longer. And turn off your television set. Stop listening to it. Because he would have been in a position to know just how you can get programmed and brainwashed by your TV, particularly when it comes to the BBC. So another clip involving Rick Mayall, which is worth conveying, is this one. He took part in a programme, What's in a Name, titled One by One, and this becomes quite prescient as well when you hear what he's got to say.
To stand up and be counted, eyes to the horizon.
The New World Order. Population reduction.
There will be a global population reduction until there are only 500 million people.
How would they reduce the population? We're not stupid.
Hitler said, the bigger the lie, the more the people will believe it.
I think it would be done Hitler style. The armed forces are going to kill us. They'll follow orders. It's what they've been trained to do. They're being taught to be racists. The army are already killing people in other countries. People in power are using fear to fuel the racism. How long before they use this racism to make soldiers turn on their own?
Mass genocide on a scale never seen before. There are a mass of ways they could introduce population slaughter. More staged events, orchestrated and maneuvered conflicts, and the use of bioengineered diseases. Vaccines. It could come in vaccines.
In the event that I am reincarnated, I'd like to come back as a deadly virus. So to contribute to solving overpopulation. Prince Philip said that.
For most, this is nothing more than a story, a diversion from the outside world. But within some of you, a feeling is starting to stir. It's time to stand up, with eyes open, ears down to the ground. A change is long overdue. So wake up.
Well, we all know that, don't we? We don't need to be told to wake up, but I actually had a chill go down my spine and goosebumps when he mentioned vaccines there, because it's just so telling. In Musical Truth 3, which will be out in a couple of weeks, I list a whole host of movies which have been unleashed over the course of the last 20 years, where the narrative involves the unleashing of a deadly bioweapon, a pandemic, a disease that gets out of control. And in each and every movie, without one single solitary exception, the only solution that's proposed to these problems is mass vaccination. The public have had that message ingrained into their consciousness on a subliminal level over and over and over through untold numbers of TV shows and movies over the past 20 years and probably before that. So that goes some of the way towards explaining why there's been such a high take-up of it and why people just don't seem to be questioning what's in these things. Because we have brainwashing, we have propaganda, we have mind control, and we have a fair amount of dark sorcery going on, I would say, as well. So there's Rick Mayall giving a warning, and again, you know, you could argue that he was just acting a role, but he's evoking the Georgia Guidestones. He's talking about how it's part of the psychopath's plans to reduce the world's population to 500 million. And he's spelling it right out there. And as we know, he didn't last too long after that. So was it just a case of bad luck that Rick landed the wrong roles? Or did he really know some stuff that he was doing his best to convey in whatever ways he could? Comic relief, to visit that for a moment. This is kind of the equivalent of Children in Need that takes place every March. Again, it's an appeal to emotion with the British public. Come on folks, dig deep, part with your money, do something stupid, act the fool, and raise some money for needy children and all this. But an investigation into comic relief found scandal when it was revealed in 2013 that some of the money raised, far from going to help people in need in Africa, had been invested in tobacco and arms companies. Unexpectedly, the findings were reported on an episode of Panorama, broadcast by the BBC itself. Lenny Henry has been the friendly face of comic relief for many years. Henry was made a Knight Bachelor in the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2015. Meet Sir Lenny.
Piece of shit.
Yeah. And he also took part in a recent NHS commercial, along with a ragtag motley crew of other Z-listers, trying to coerce the black population into taking a COVID vaccine, because the take-up levels among black and Asian communities had been very low. I wonder why that could be. Could it be because those communities have a natural suspicion towards authority and towards the establishment, because of the way expressions of the establishment, like the British Empire, have treated their people and their nations over the years? Anyway, Sir Lenny was a part of that, and he can take his place alongside all the other traitors and sellouts when this shit show is finally over. And everyone gets remembered for the position that they took in this whole sorry charade. Their names will be remembered. We will not forget. BBC controversies. There's even a Wikipedia page on this, can you believe? And it lists the various controversies that the BBC's been embroiled in through its history. This page only goes up to 1998, so imagine how much more there is to say. BBC complaints double in 2 years as political bias incenses viewers. So more and more as the years progress, people seem to be noticing how much propaganda and mind control and bias the corporation is putting across in its news coverage, and particularly in shows like Newsnight and Question Time. And even, you know, mind-controlled normies are starting to notice this now. And there have been many, many complaints made about it. Every now and again, you get a BBC presenter who decides to walk through no longer being able to stand what they're a part of. And we had this a few years ago with Peter Sissons, the newscaster, who said the BBC has become a factory. He lambasts the corporation over executive pay, overworked staff and too much opinion. So, fair play to him. I was told before I started the presentation that Andrew Marr has recently walked from the BBC.
Yeah.
So I don't know what his reasons were, whether they were moral and ethical, or whether he didn't get enough of a pay rise. But either way, you know, he was obviously a very high-profile presenter, and he's walked from that position as well. So that will do the BBC no favours in terms of its public image. We have another video to play here, so this is the last one.
Has he had a bath yet? Oh, do not know.
Who's that?
Andrew Marr.
Has he had a bath?
A bath?
Yeah, he's had a bath, yeah. No, but just be nice to see, you know, see him die in a bath.
Oh,
That's not nice.
No, that took some explaining.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No. He might be advised to take only showers. I thought you were going to say he looked smelly when he was on it.
No.
Okay, so another former BBC presenter who has spoken out about the bias and propaganda within the corporation is Sue Cook, who was a former presenter on Crime Watch. Got a lot of respect for her. She came out last year and said she could no longer be a part of things there, and she had some very profound criticism to make of the BBC. Now this clip is from Alex Belfield. I couldn't find the original. Sue Cook was being interviewed by Anna Breeze, but I've got Belfield on the beginning because I couldn't find the version without him in it, so he'll be over in a minute. Let's hear what Sue Cook had to say.
Whenever I have any phone call I have, conversation will always turn to the media, and people will be saying, what is the matter with the media these days? It's so scary. I can't, loads of people I know say they don't watch it anymore, they don't watch mainstream media at all. Loads of people say that, which is a real worry, because, you know, how are you going to get your facts? How are you going to know what's going on if you're not watching anything at all? Everyone from the butcher to, you know, somebody else walking their dog and walking possibly in the street will all say, what on earth is going on with the media? And I have to say, like you, I felt it was such a privilege to work for the BBC when I first started working for them back in the 70s. I was just knocked out by how wonderful it was to be working for the BBC. And I've been so loyal to them for years and years, but the last couple of months is really, I'm afraid, disillusioned me terribly. And I've actually stopped listening to the Today programme for the first time in about 20 years. I'm now listening to talk radio because I get my concerns addressed on talk radio. I don't hear people being insulted and interrupted and talked over as though they do, I'm afraid, on the Today programme.
That's really sad. It's really sad, Sue. And you know, from both of us having worked for the BBC and being so, I mean, I can't tell you how excited I was. I couldn't believe it. I had to pinch myself for days. I couldn't believe I got a job at the BBC. And now I would not take a job at the BBC. I would be ashamed to take a job at the BBC. And I know that people who work there have been getting a lot of abuse, which I completely find absolutely abhorrent, any type of abuse. But those people at the BBC that are trying to reform from within, that are frustrated at the moment, I don't think they realise how important trust is to their brands, and it's being eroded. So that if they don't get that reform from within, there will be no future. You know, if you don't listen to the public, if you don't investigate, you lose trust.
It's a bad edit there. It's all fallen out of sync. But anyway, you get the gist. When I was a full-time DJ, I was working on radio, I wanted nothing more than to get a role on BBC Radio 1 or BBC 1 Extra. I can relate to what Sue Cook is saying there about how excited she was to even the prospect of working for the BBC, because I was once there. You know, if you are a radio DJ and you are ambitious, as I was, I used to be quite ruled by my ego before I got that all in check and became a lot more humble. You kind of have to be a bit like that to make it as a DJ, to be honest, because it's so cutthroat and so competitive. But I wanted nothing more than to be on one of these BBC stations. And I sent in demo tapes all the time, and I would try and phone the programme director and get an appointment with them. One time I actually turned up at the Radio 1 headquarters in the lobby and said to the receptionist, can you get the programme director down? I want to take him out to lunch and explain to him why he needs me on his station. That's how desperate I'd become. Needless to say, he didn't appear. But that was me, you know, when I knew no better. This would be 15, 20 years ago. And now, knowing what I know about the true nature of the BBC, and knowing what I know about what really goes on in this world and who really controls things and what the overarching agenda is, I realise that not making it on the BBC is one of the best things that never happened to me. Thank God. What a blessing. Couldn't have told me back then. There was a book that came out quite recently, a couple of years ago I think, by David Sedgwick, called The BBC Brainwashing Britain. On the back cover of the book it reads, "The people of Britain are under attack. We're being brainwashed completely, ceaselessly and cynically. Just who is doing the brainwashing? How are they doing it and for what purposes?" Every time we engage with BBC content, the author argues, we are exposing ourselves to a very dark art, the art of brainwashing. Willful, deceitful and incessant Orwellian parallels define the modern corporation and should chill the soul of all who cherish freedom and liberty. Mind control is here, this is not fiction. And there was an Amazon review of the book where a member of the public said what they thought of it. David Sedgwick accuses BBC employees of having a hive mentality, the like of which doesn't exist in other large corporations. He says, and quotes ex-employees as saying, that if you're a wrong thinker or read the wrong newspapers, you'll never progress within the BBC. He refers to their journalists as activists, regurgitating other left liberal tweets and news sources rather than doing their job of investigating. Often, these journalists are giving personal views instead of facts. Like Orwell's dystopia in 1984, they have hate figures about whom they can demonstrate their group hate and check each other's faith and allegiance. Trump, Robinson, Daily Mail readers, Brexiteers, white Christian males, etc. And this hive mentality and the fear of being ostracised by your peers if you step outside of what's acceptable may go some way to explaining how Savile was able to get away with it for so long. Because how many people, when his true nature was finally exposed, made comments like, oh well, we all kind of knew about it, it was like a best kept secret, you just knew not to say anything about it. I remember Noel Edmonds came out and said something like that, Esther Rancid said something like that, Bill Oddie, you know, all these BBC presenters that were around in Savile's day afterwards were very quick to distance themselves from him and say, oh well, we kind of knew what he was up to. Why the bloody hell didn't you say anything at the time then? There's no excuse. Thinking about your career and your pension plan and not wanting to upset your bosses when children are being abused and you know about it is unforgivable. That's unjustifiable on any level. And you had Johnny Rotten as well, made these famous comments in 1978. Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols, being interviewed. He says, there are all kinds of people that I'd like to kill. He says, I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile. I bet he's up to all kinds of sordid stuff that we're not supposed to talk about. 1978. And so Johnny Rotten was displaying inside knowledge of what Savile was up to, that the general public wasn't privy to. I'll be getting into Johnny Rotten's comments and putting those into a wider perspective in tomorrow's talk. For anyone that's going to be at the community centre tomorrow, there's more to say on all of that. But that seems to have been the culture within the BBC. You keep your mouth shut if you want your career to remain intact. And that's how so many of them got away with it. The Savile scandal, this is me speaking now, in case you can't detect the tone. The Savile scandal should have spelt the end of the BBC, or at the very least led to a nation so collectively outraged by what had been going on right under their noses that they refused en masse to continue paying the licence fee that funds the BBC's activities. Somewhere in a parallel universe stands a country of aware, morally motivated people where exactly that has happened. But not, sadly, in this one. Either way, Rolf Harris's Two Little Boys, Gary Glitter's I'm the Leader of the Gang, I Am, Cliff Richard's The Young Ones, and Jonathan King's Let It All Hang Out are 4 songs you needn't expect to hear on the radio anytime soon. I've given a lot of thought to what it would take to break the brainwashing spell that has swept over the British public these past 2 years during the Covid scandemic, where you've got all these frightened looking people still scurrying around in masks, still afraid to stand to the person next to the person in the supermarket and all this, believing every word that they've been told by proven, known liars, frauds, Satanists, paedophiles, thieves, murderers. But enough about the government. That would apply to the BBC as well. What would it take to break all that? I think the only type of thing that would do it and would bring about a mass awakening forcibly applied against these people's will, because sometimes you have to force people to wake up to truth if their remaining in a state of ignorance is affecting your rights and your freedoms. If that's the case, they have no right to remain in that ignorant, profane state. And it becomes a right that you take on to force them to confront truth, so that you then can begin to live free, because you don't consent to having your rights taken away. And these people are doing harm. They're putting harm into the world for as long as they're facilitating that dynamic. So what would break that? I think it would involve something like a large group of the type, the likes of us, hijacking BBC television centre during a live broadcast, you know, kidnapping the security guys, tying them up, throwing them in a cupboard with a gag on, and just bum rushing the broadcast and going on air and blurting out as much truth, slogans, banners, data as you can get away with before remotely somewhere some director panics and says, pull the kill switch, and they kill the broadcast. You might get 10, 15 seconds before that happens, but imagine what you could get across in those 10, 15 seconds. And if you were able to achieve that, the British public would be talking about nothing else the following day. Everyone in the entire land would be saying, did you see what came on the BBC last night? Did you see it? Did you hear what they said? What they were saying about vaccines? What they said about COVID? The effects of that would be monumental and would be a game changer. So, anyone got any ski masks? I think that's something that needs to happen. I mean, we hear about this emergency broadcast system that's supposed to be kicking in as part of the Q narrative, which I lost faith in many months ago. It's along similar lines to this, but I think that's the only type of thing that's going to do it. Because the BBC has worked for many decades to get itself into the mindset of the general British public, and they've become a trusted source, you know, even in spite of all this evidence to show their true sordid nature, and the fact that they've harboured and shielded paedophiles for all these decades. That's what it's going to take. Either way, I've got my Halloween decor sorted for next year. This will stop the little bastards coming round. I will be doing another talk tomorrow at the Walkerville Community Centre. Kicks off 1 PM. Is that right? Yeah. 1 o'clock. So I'll be getting into some content from Musical Truth Volume 3, which is due to drop in about 2 weeks now. It's called Sound Bites, and it's little stories. So I've got chapters in the book consisting of brief stories that reinforce points that I've made in previous volumes of the book. And I've selected 5 of these stories which I think translate very well into live presentations. We've got some video clips, there's plenty of imagery, and I think people will find these very interesting. So for anyone that can make it down to the community centre tomorrow, got another talk there at 1 o'clock. Got copies of the book here. Volume 3 sadly is absent, but 1 and 2 are here for anyone that's not yet got a copy. I think probably most people in the room have. Other than that, thank you for listening, and shall we do some questions?
Mark, I wrote you a poem.
Oh.
Right. Well, what can I say about our Mark? He exposed the music world, it's all so dark. He tells it like it is, it's really quite sick, this music biz. With special thanks to Passio and Ike for whetting our Mark's appetite. To get to the truth on the side of good, he can't be stopped, it's in his blood. Truth, freedom, justice, love, a special message sent from above. To expose the dark and end the lies, to bring down the people we simply despise. What a year it's been, unbelievable to see, when The Walking Dead became a reality. These shit show actors, I do not wish to dwell, we all know those bastards are going to hell. The whole scam is falling apart, it's all been exposed, they're not very smart. You chose this path, you've got a job to do, and always remember we will come through. And one last thing to stay on your mind, Truth Seekers Northeast will always love you.
I'm all choked up.
Well done.
Thank you.
And there's a framed copy of the poem.
Oh wow, brilliant.
It's a framed copy written by our Dory.
That's great.
So there you go, that's your framed copy.
Thanks
If
so
you
much.
ever feel down, just read that.
Yeah. Well, certain lines will cheer me up. We all know those bastards are going to hell.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And we've also got presents for you. We don't like our guests to go away
It's the vegan
empty-handed.
cheese. It's the vegan cheese, isn't it?
Oh, I've got you the vegan cheese, yes. But a Truth Seeker Northeast t-shirt.
Brilliant.
There you go.
Brilliant.
And we know you talk about the Beatles a lot, so we've got you that.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I hope you haven't got that in your collection.
My favourite Beatle.
Yeah, that's why we got you.
Yeah.
What about that other Beatles book? You know,
Don't tell him, that's for
oh
tomorrow.
shit! Oh,
He's just ruined your surprise for
sorry.
tomorrow.
If you'd given me Ringo the tribute, I'd have been really pissed off.
That's tomorrow.
Sorry, Maureen.
Did everybody enjoy that?
Yes.
Who's coming tomorrow?
Thanks so much.
Who's coming tomorrow? Hands up. Ooh, I think they're all
well,
back
good.
tomorrow.
Find out who that 80s
Dawn's
pop
obviously
group is.
not coming. Yeah, so you'll see the same faces, plus about another 30.
Good. Well, thanks.
And you won't get fed the way you're getting fed tonight, by the way. It's coffee and biscuits and all that. That's it. So we've got Mark tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon, Musical Truth 3. And my next speaker will be a medium called Jackie Wright, December the 11th. And then next year we've got Rachel White and Richard Hook, who are talking about JFK, John F. Kennedy. And then on the 28th and 29th of January we've got Andrew Johnson.